History doesn't just fail suddenly, it sends warnings first. Before America's biggest disasters, economic crashes, wars, social breakdowns, the signs were always clear. Reports were written. Experts spoke out. Red flags were raised, but they were ignored. This is the story of the warning signs America saw coming, and the price it paid for looking away. America likes to believe its greatest crises come out of nowhere, that disasters strike without warning. But history tells a very different story. Again and again, the nation was warned quietly, clearly, and repeatedly. And again, it chose not to listen. Let's go back to the late 1920s, the Roaring '20s. The United States was booming. Stocks were soaring. Credit was easy. Optimism filled the air. It felt like the party would never end. But beneath all that excitement, some economists were raising alarms. They warned about reckless speculation, massive personal and corporate debt, and a banking system that was dangerously unstable. These weren't just whispers in academic circles. Newspapers reported on it. Experts testified before Congress. The warnings were public, out in the open for anyone who cared to look. Still, the prevailing attitude was one of unchecked confidence. "Don't be a pessimist," was the cry. "The fundamentals are sound." So, nothing changed. The speculation continued. The debt grew larger. The system became even more fragile. Then, in 1929, the stock market collapsed. It wasn't a single bad day. It was the beginning of a downward spiral. Banks failed, taking people's life savings with them. Jobs disappeared overnight. Families who thought they were secure suddenly lost everything. The Great Depression didn't just happen. It arrived after years of clear, documented warnings were deliberately ignored. Decades later, the same pattern returned. But this time, the setting was the jungles of Vietnam. By the early 1960s, many U.S. officials privately admitted the war was unwinnable. It wasn't just a hunch. Internal reports painted a bleak picture. Rising casualties, declining troop morale, and absolutely no clear path to victory. These stark assessments were kept hidden from the American public. Leaders, worried about the political fallout of admitting failure, chose to double down instead. They feared the political consequences of withdrawal more than the long-term damage of a pointless war. So, the war escalated. More troops were sent, more bombs were dropped, more lives were lost. It wasn't until the Pentagon Papers were leaked in 1971 that the full extent of the deception was revealed to the public. The truth came out, but it was too late. By then, trust in the government had shattered. Millions of Americans had taken to the streets in protest. Thousands of soldiers had died for a cause their own leaders knew was failing. The warnings had been real, written down in classified reports. The cost of ignoring them was permanent, scarring a generation and changing America's relationship with its government forever. Fast forward to the early 2000s. America entered another era of seemingly boundless confidence. The new American dream was homeownership, and it was being celebrated everywhere. Housing prices soared to unbelievable heights. Getting a loan was easier than ever. It felt like everyone was getting rich. But again, financial experts saw the danger lurking beneath the surface. They warned about a new, toxic invention: subprime mortgages. They pointed to unregulated lending practices and financial institutions that were building towers of risk on a foundation of sand. Reports were filed with regulatory agencies. Meetings were held in the halls of power. Concerns were meticulously documented, yet the response was slow, fragmented, and ultimately ineffective. The system was making too many people too much money to stop the party. Action was delayed. Then, in 2008, the whole system broke. Lehman Brothers collapsed. AIG, one of the world's largest insurers, needed a massive bailout. The stock market crashed, wiping out trillions in wealth. Millions of people lost their homes, their jobs, and their savings. Once again, the crisis wasn't a surprise. It was a well-documented warning that had been dismissed and ignored. But warnings aren't always economic or military. Sometimes, they're social. For decades, study after study showed the same disturbing trends: rising income inequality, deepening political polarization, and a steady decline in public trust in almost every major institution. From the government to the media, researchers and sociologists warned that this growing division, if left unaddressed, could seriously destabilize the very foundations of democracy. They argued that a society so deeply fractured would struggle to solve any problem, big or small. These warnings weren't secret, whispered in ivory towers. They were published in books and articles. They were debated on television. But for the most part, they were dismissed as academic or partisan complaints. The issues seemed slow-moving, too abstract to demand immediate action. It was easier to focus on the next election cycle or the daily stock market numbers. By the time unrest and anger spilled onto the streets, the damage was already done. The social fabric was already frayed. History had spoken early, but America had listened far too late. So, why does this keep happening? Why does a nation so full of brilliant, capable people repeatedly walk into disasters it was warned about? The simple answer is that warnings are inconvenient. They demand sacrifice. They threaten powerful interests. They require taking difficult, often unpopular action. Asterisk, before asterisk, a disaster makes it unavoidable. It's always easier to ignore a problem, to kick the can down the road, and hope it goes away on its own. It feels easier, that is, until the catastrophic consequences arrive. Across generations and across different types of crises, the pattern remains disturbingly the same. First comes the warning. Then comes denial. It's not that bad. You're exaggerating. Then comes delay. We need more data. Now is not the right time. Then, finally, comes the collapse, the crash, the crisis. And after that comes regret. How could we have let this happen? Why didn't anyone see this coming? But they did see it coming. The most dangerous moment in history isn't the crisis itself. It's the moment just before that quiet, tense period when the warning is clear. The choice is obvious, and doing nothing feels safer than taking a stand. America has faced that moment many times before, and the history books have recorded the devastating results. The question now is whether the warnings of today about climate change, about technological disruption, about social cohesion will be treated any differently. What happens next depends entirely on whether this time the warning is finally heard. Thanks for watching. If this made you think, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the patterns that shape our world.